Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Rob and welcome to another episode of Let's Draw. In this episode, we'll be drawing Midna from The Legend of Zelda, Twilight Princess. And as you can see, I'm not using Krita. This is actually Clip Studio Paint Pro, or as it's called in the US release, Manga Studio Pro. Yeah. But I do this to show that the workflow really doesn't change for whatever tool you happen to be using, whether it be Clip Studio Paint, whether it be Krita, Photoshop, or what have you. So, like with Krita, I've started with a simple skeleton sketch, and then on a new layer on top of that, I've started sketching out cleaner line art, and I'll be using that as my reference while I do the real paint over. The composition here is shamelessly stolen from Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. The realization struck me as I was initially concepting this episode that Midna's value patterns and overall silhouette match very closely to the Mona Lisa herself, so the matching fit in my mind. Now, there's nothing too special happening here. This is pretty much my standard way of sketching, but again, I want to emphasize that I'm drawing through the figure. So even for the parts that are going to be obfuscated by clothing, like her shoulders and elbows, things like that, I'm still taking the time to draw the entire figure as if it weren't there. This is how you guarantee that your forms, your anatomy, and your perspective, foreshortening, all of these elements come together. If I didn't draw it, if I simply went with gut instinct, there's a very good chance that something could be skewed and I wouldn't notice it. So now here, I'm filling out a few of the more complicated details, but I'm leaving it empty because I'll fill in the real details as I do the paint over, saving myself a little bit of time there. So now that I'm happy with my overall sketch, I erase the lines that would be obfuscated, clean it up just slightly, and now on a new layer, a multiply, I've set the sketch to multiply, and on a new layer just underneath that, I'm blocking in the various colors I'm going to use. The background is just simple earth tones with a little bit of shading toward the bottom to help draw the attention back up to the face. And now I'm filling in my flat colors. But as you notice, I'm not really using just a mid-tone. I have a bit of a highlight there coming in from using the white of the background. Similarly, I'm filling in shadows a bit on this same layer as my flats. Yes, this is a little different from my usual workflow, but in this case I'm doing it to help push this very painterly effect, to make it feel a bit more like the original Mona Lisa painting. So by having it all on the same layer, you have these sort of imperfections and bleed overs and brush strokes that are very apparent. While normally I don't like to have that in my work, in this case, since it's ripping directly from the Mona Lisa, I felt that I should keep that very painterly look. So that's why shadows and highlights and flats are all going on the same layer. Aside from that, however, it's my fairly standard workflow. And the important thing here is control of values. I want to make sure that I keep the emphasis where it belongs. So as I work through my flats and as I fill in shadows and highlights, I'm constantly going back and monitoring, making sure that the parts that I wanted dark are truly dark when contrasted against the midtones that I have around it, and especially with when contrasted with the highlights that I'm deciding to keep. So I'm constantly going back and reworking the values all across this entire layer, making sure to keep a good balance. You want to make sure that in your work you have a full value range. There are some images and there are some compositions that sort of demand this a very limited range of values, something very high key or something very low key. and it all depends on the feel that you want to bring across, but generally for most everyday quasi-realist paintings, you want to have a full value range. So it's important that you constantly balance that out. And there I'm filling in the shadows of her hair, and it's a bit tricky because the color of the hair is so light and so fair that I had to make sure that the shadows were cool and strong enough to bring down the overall value so that it doesn't detract too much from her face or look out of place when compared to her outfit. Generally, I like to work with color groups. So I started with the cooler, darker colors of her skin and her clothing, moved on to the hair, and then I started to fill in the earth tones of her jewelry, the clip holding her ponytails together, that sort of thing. This is purely a preference thing. You can do your workflow however you would like, and it really shouldn't change too much, but I find it easier to balance all of the different elements of the painting as I work by being very methodical. So at this point, I'm erasing a bit of the line art. The bits that I don't need, really. And I judge what I do and don't need mostly from whether or not it falls in a shadow or a highlight. Line art that falls in a highlight, primarily I'm erasing. The ones that fall in the shadow, I'm keeping to sort of help emphasize the shadow a bit. But at this point, I'm cleaning up now around her face, making sure that it gets the right shape, that I have hard edges where I need them, that I have soft edges where I need them, that sort of thing. Now, because my shadows, midtones, and highlights were all done on the same layer, unlike the previous video, I don't have very much work to do to fill in gaps or spaces between all these different colors. I'm simply tightening up my forms, making sure it's cleaner. As I'm working now, I'm zoomed in 2 steps closer than I did originally. As you can see, I don't have the entire image in the frame right now in my workspace because it's not necessary. By being zoomed out and working over the entire image at first to establish my overall values, to get the forms right, to get my big strokes down basically, I've guaranteed that now when I zoom in, as long as I don't make major changes, everything will still shake out just right. My values will still be correct, my colors will still be right. So that's kind of a good tip I could give you there. Work on the entire image at first, be happy with that, and then zoom in and do details. I know it's very tempting to work on details straight away, but you're doing yourself a disservice. You're making it much more difficult than it needs to be by doing it that way. So it's better to make sure that the entire image works as a whole and then zoom in and really get into those fun, nitty details. Like this jewelry. It existed simply as a generalized shape in the line art, even up to this point, but now it's filled in. Now it has all the little segments of the snakes, highlights and shading, things like that. And as I add more detail, I zoom in closer and closer to get finer and finer brushwork. As you're cleaning it up, just remember to use a brush with the largest size you possibly can for the task that you're working on. So if you're filling in a highlight on a cheek, say, you want to use a nice wide brush versus trying to fill in the upper eyelid or something like that, where you would want to use a very fine, small brush. The reason for that is fairly obvious. Wide areas you'd want to cover in as few brushstrokes as possible so that you can maintain a nice even tone across the entire thing. Otherwise, you're no longer really cleaning it up. You're creating this sort of gritty look. And you know, if that's what you wanted to go for, if that's the style that you want, the impression that you want, then that would, by all means. But generally, for this step of tightening it up, what you're trying to do is eliminate stray strokes and get bigger areas of seemingly a single brushstroke, ideally, realistically of a single brushstroke, that communicates the exact statement that you want to make. So like there on the hand, I've reduced down the statement of the highlight across the first knuckles as simply a single brushstroke in a slightly lighter color. It's to communicate that simple idea as clearly and precisely as possible. That's generally what I mean by cleaning up, by tightening up. Now here I've got the detail in her headpiece coming in. I painted it first in its darkest shadow color, and now I'm using its highlight color to bring out the details. And as you can see, by doing it in that way, I'm able to very quickly establish a 3D form. And that's simply with two colors. A shadow color, which is my base color in this case as well, and a highlight color. And I'm just simply keeping in mind my light source and making good decisions with how I lay down the paint. Always trying to maintain an economy of brushstrokes to give it that clean look. With forms like this, you know, very simplified, very regular, sweeping shapes, it's very easy. It's not like a face. This jewelry, things like that are a pleasure to paint because they're just effortless, they flow. Midna's eyes have a sort of cat-like mascara to them. So I've added that last on its own layer so that I can very carefully control exactly how dark it is, because I don't want to completely blow out all of the shading that I've done on her eyelids and things like that. So when you're doing makeup, it actually helps to do this on its own layer, to set it as multiply and then adjust the opacity. It's a faster way to maintain your lighting information without losing it all and having to rework it